Oh, so thanks, Jonathan. So it's my happy half-year anniversary working as a developer today, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey from management consulting to my current role as a developer. I will touch on why I wanted to move, the research I had to do, and how I became comfortable with making such a big decision. So coming out of university where I studied psychology, I joined EY on their management consulting graduate scheme in their financial services technology division. I chose consulting because I thought it would give me a good, broad and solid foundation in business skills that would leave me with plenty of options if I did decide to do something else further down the line. I also liked the fact that it was project-based, so it meant I could move around and gain exposure to working with different types of businesses. So in my 3 years there, I acquired some great experience across financial services. I worked with investment banks, commercial banks, and wealth asset managers to roll out large-scale implementation programs and post-merger acquisitions. However, I didn't do a whole lot of technology, and I was starting to notice how bogged down by bureaucracy some of these big banks were, and how that often made them quite slow to adapt to change. At the same time, the industry was shifting. Unknown digital challenger banks were gaining market share and disrupting the industry with their innovative technology platforms that their customers really engaged with. They were small, agile, fast-paced, and I wanted experience of working in this kind of environment and to be part of the disruption. So I found a fintech through Silicon Milk Roundabout that helped small businesses to access funding through their own technology platform and joined them as a project manager. I did have some doubts initially about moving from a big, safe corporate to a riskier venture, but I knew that at the worst, if things didn't work out, I could always go back to consulting. As expected, the fintech was a completely different environment. Things moved extremely quickly, and we were releasing new features literally week by week. It was also the first time that I was so close to seeing how a product was built from a technology perspective, and I became fascinated by it. In my role, I was always manually testing the customer journey, and I would often find myself reporting bugs to the developers and sitting with them to try and figure out what had caused these. There was something truly satisfying about the outcome of their work being so tangible. Also, in working with the developers to deliver projects, I realized there were significant gaps in my technical knowledge that I really wanted to fill. So I started exploring coding outside of work. My company gave us an annual learning budget, and I used part of it to do a weekend introduction to coding course at General Assembly. I also attended meetups and free coding workshops run by organizations such as CodeBar, LeWagon, Founders and Coders. And I was pleasantly surprised by how many free resources there are out there and how welcoming the community was to newbies like me. I was really enjoying learning to code and started to consider this as not only a useful skill to have, but something I could see myself possibly doing as a career. And along the way, I discovered Makers, a 4-month intensive coding bootcamp designed for people who want to change careers and get a job in software engineering. After doing my research and speaking to people in my network who had done Makers themselves, just over a year ago, I made the leap to hand in my resignation and go for the course. It was an amazing experience to go back to learning in such a hands-on environment with people from all backgrounds and different stages of their career and life. I was in a cohort with people who had just graduated from university to 50-year-olds who had worked in the same industry for 20 years and decided they wanted to change. And we all went from knowing only basic code to being able to build a full stack applications in just a few months. The other major benefit I found of doing a bootcamp was the support they provided with the job hunting process, as they held career fairs every month where their hiring partners would attend and speak to us. After my graduation, I attended one of these and applied to a couple of companies I met there and liked. And it was through this that I found RVU. So RVU felt like the perfect balance between a large company and a fast-growing startup, as they have a very entrepreneurial culture and spirit with a more mature business and platform behind them. Needless to say, I've not been disappointed by the level of support and learning opportunities that I've had since joining them. By day 3, I was already pushing changes to the code base live on the Uswitch site. And since then, I've worked on various projects ranging from rebuilding the careers website completely from scratch to working on new features for the broadband and energy journeys on our USwitch website. I think on reflection, one of the hardest things about making a career change is dealing with the uncertainty and possibility of failure. But if you prepare well, then you can mitigate this so it feels less like jumping off a cliff. And so if I could distill my experience into 3 key steps or phases, it would look something like this. So the first phase is the exploration phase, understanding whether this is something you really want to do day in and day out, and just trying things out. I'm not saying that you have to build a whole website, but dabbling enough in it that you know that you enjoy it and want to do more of it. And going to meetups to meet developers and find out what it's like to work as a software engineer. So this phase is all about following your curiosity and being open to new opportunities. Then the second phase would be the research phase. So once you've decided that you want to pursue this path more seriously, then it's really important to understand all your options. So visit all the boot camps and attend their open days, and crucially, speak to alumni to understand what you're letting yourself in for. So some of the key things to consider are: what is the reputation of the course among students and employers? What is the quality of the course content? And what languages will you learn? How is the teaching delivered? And does this style suit your learning? What is the completion rate like? Do many people drop out? Because if so, it suggests that there isn't really enough support on the course. How are they preparing you for working as a software developer in the real world? And where have they placed their graduates? Another thing that I would highly recommend doing is LinkedIn stalking people who have graduated from the boot camps to see where they're working now. So the third phase would be budgeting and saving. I would say you should almost do this in parallel with the research phase, because getting your finances in order is really important, as often there is a cost associated with making a career change. Even if you decide to do a free course like Founders and Coders, you may still have to quit your job and take time off to do it, which means potentially no income for at least 5 months, factoring in job hunting time. Switching careers requires a lot of focus, and you want to be able to commit fully without being distracted by financial worries. And finally, once you've done all this, then it's time for liftoff. When you're ready, just go for it and don't look back. I wouldn't wait longer than you need to, or you may put it off forever. I've seen people who've stayed self-teaching for years because they never feel like they're quite ready yet, or it's never the right time. I think that this framework can be applied not just to changing careers, but any major move that you make in your life, whether it be pursuing a passion or starting a new hobby, or even moving teams or departments within your company. It can definitely be scary to make a big change in your life, but one thing I've learned through all of this is to listen to your intuition and that inner voice. So I wanted to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Sheryl Sandberg. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was a really great talk. So I now get the honor of asking you some questions. So for those who haven't used Zoom before, it has an ability to post Q&A. There's a small button on the bottom bar that says Q&A. And what you can do is you can go in there and type a question. In the meantime, I've got a few questions. So I did tell Natalie I'd ask this, which is tabs or spaces.
I thought you were joking.
I don't joke about tabs or spaces.
So, well, I would just recommend using a linter. That would auto indent your code for you, so you don't have to worry about that.
Fair enough. Good answer. Joking aside, though, like if someone has tried coding before and they found it really challenging, but really likes the idea of coding, what would you recommend for them?
I think that, yeah, that's a good question. I think I would. It depends how long they've been trying it for. But I think if they really loved it, then I think that they would be able to. They would be able to do well on it, because I do think coding is something you can learn. I think obviously some people have a natural sort of knack for it, but I do think it's not something that's impossible to learn. And so if you're committed enough and motivated enough, I definitely think it's not impossible. So yeah, I'd recommend them just to sort of spend more time. There were lots of resources that I found helpful when I was starting out. So Code Academy was a good resource that I found when I first started learning. And also I'd recommend that they go to really supportive communities and workshops such as Code Bar. So they're free, they're a not-for-profit organization that holds weekly sort of workshops where you can go and get paired with mentors. And essentially for the whole time, 2 hours, you can just work with the mentor on whatever you want to work on, whatever projects you're working on, and get help there. So there are plenty of sort of resources out there that they could use.
Cool. So someone's posted a question in the Q&A. How do you keep up with rapidly changing technology?
Oh, it's a good question. Another good question. So yeah, I think that's it's tricky to be keeping up with technology because it's always changing and there are always new sort of frameworks coming out and new technologies coming out. But I guess I'm still continuing to go to meetups, even during the lockdown, sort of going to them. I think that's a good way as well because they often speak about sort of new technology there. And again, sort of at work as well, I'm exposed to sort of new technology, speaking with my colleagues too. And yeah, and generally sort of, I follow a few sort of blogs on Medium, and that's another good way, sort of reading blogs to keep up with changing technology.
Cool. I've got a great question from Jordan. It's a really interesting journey culturally. How have you found your career and development versus your time in consulting?
Yeah, so it's definitely, it has been definitely different. There are, I think, there certainly have been similarities. And I'd say, for example, the collaborative nature is fairly similar, but also as a developer, it definitely feels a lot more like you're working towards you're sort of you're united with your team in achieving the same goal. And it definitely does feel collaborative in a different way, because consulting was team-based. So there's similarity there, but yeah, and I guess with development, you're a lot more in the details, whereas consulting was quite high level. So yeah, it's very different there.
Cool. Tom Michaelis has asked a great question as well, which is, hey, Natalie, you put a lot of thought into what you were looking for from your career change. Do you know if it's been a good choice yet? How would you suggest aspiring career changers assess the success of their choice?
Really good question. And so I think there are a couple of answers to that. The first part is yes, I know that it's been a good choice. And I think you can tell that pretty quickly. I think one, you can kind of feel it. And as I mentioned, your intuition kind of tells you whether you're enjoying something and whether it feels right or not. And I guess the other way that you can assess the success of your choice is by asking for feedback from your peers and your managers and people that you work with. That's definitely another good way to sort of assess how well you're doing in your career. And yeah.
Is there a piece of feedback you received in your past few months since you became an engineer that's really stuck with you and helped you?
Yeah, I think actually another thing that I've been quite surprised about, or pleasantly surprised about having gone into developing, is how useful soft skills actually are, and how much they're sort of regarded. Because I think the sort of stereotype or the sort of impression that I had before I knew much about software engineering was that it was very technical, and sort of the soft skills were kind of less important. But actually, having sort of become a developer, I've realized they're sort of almost just as important as the technical side of things are. So, you know, being able to communicate really well, and work collaboratively with people from other disciplines, is actually really important. And being able to sort of explain and what you're doing as well to non-technical people, yeah, is also sort of crucial.
Cool. How have you found working as a software engineer versus what you were expecting when learning or going through the bootcamp? And that's from Megan.
Yeah, so I think the bootcamp prepared me quite well for what working as a software engineer would be like. And that was definitely one of the reasons why I chose to do a bootcamp, because not just because of the languages they taught you, but also because they taught you about the way of working as a software engineer. So there have definitely been some similarities in the way that I worked at the bootcamp. So we did, for example, we did plenty of team projects, and we would sort of do daily stand-ups and use sort of a board, a retro board, and have retrospectives. So that, yeah, I definitely didn't find it a big shock coming to work as a software engineer, because I'd already been exposed to kind of that agile way of working.
Cool. Um, does the way your team work significantly differ from consulting then? Like, what's the key difference in the way you work?
Absolutely. I think the nature of the work definitely differs a lot. So in consulting, we wouldn't have had sort of daily stand-ups, and we would have had team meetings, but there was, yeah, it wasn't as sort of communicative or structured. And we'd spend most of our day sort of working on slideshows or speaking to clients, or you know, yeah, in meetings. Whereas as a developer, you do, well, you code.
Cool. Is there any more questions from the audience? Because obviously I could ask questions all day. Okay, so we've got a question from Minty Yang. Did you start hunting for a job straight away after bootcamp? Did you feel prepared?
Yeah, so I pretty much went straight into job hunting after graduating. And did I feel prepared? Yes, yes and no. I think you always worry that you're not quite ready yet, or you're not prepared enough yet, or you haven't done, you know, enough coding. But at the same time, the bootcamp prepares you quite well for this phase, and they've got a lot of support there to help you with the job hunting. So, for example, I think by week 5 or 6 of the course, I was already doing sort of tech reviews. So that was where you could have basically like a tech interview, a remote one with someone that you didn't know, and they would just watch you. They would ask you a sort of basic problem, and you'd have to solve it in front of them. So, and I think also week 10, we had just a whole week dedicated to doing sort of code tests. So we were definitely ready by the time it came to graduation. And they also had a whole careers team that helped us sort of with our CVs and preparing for interviews and things like that.
Cool. And this is going to be our last question, again from Tom. So clearly the careers fair stage of the bootcamp was really useful for you. Is there anything else the engineering community could have done to help career changers like yourself find your ideal job?
Yeah, I think that's a good good question. because I think the community already does quite a lot for career changes, but they definitely do more from the aspect of helping people learn to code rather than necessarily helping them find a job. So potentially, you know, there could be sort of like a jobs board that could help, or like a meetup that's specifically for sort of pairing employers with people looking to do career changes. I remember one really good meetup that I went to where they were pairing sort of people just starting out their careers with mentors in the industry. So potentially doing something like that for people who are yet to change their career yet would be quite useful.